Today is October 5th, 2023. My name is Roxanne Evans, and I am interviewing Precursor John Hall for the Contextualization and Commemoration Initiative. We're on the University of Texas at Austin campus. Thank you, Mr. Hall, for agreeing to this interview today. Welcome.
Well, thank you for the opportunity.
This interview is being recorded, and the unedited copy will be housed at UT and possibly other archives. Please note that if there is anything you do not wish to discuss, I will honor your wishes. If there are any topics you wish to discuss that I've not asked about, please do bring them up. Lastly, if we need to take a break to get a drink of water or anything else, just let me know.
Will do.
Okay. Well, Mr. Hall, let's start with your childhood. Where did you grow up, and what were race relations like in your community?
I grew up in Washington on the Brazos. Everybody was involved in agriculture and ranching. And race relations in that small rural area was probably what it was anywhere in the Deep South. It was important for African Americans to know their place and to show great deference to white people. I often was angry with my dad. We would go up to the little country store, and the owner had a little son who at the time was probably about 5 years old. And my dad felt that he had to refer to him as Mr. Mike, and he referred to my dad as Jack. At least that was the perception that existed, even if it wasn't the actuality.
Now, tell me about the schools that you attended as a child. What were your schools like growing up?
Schools were good. I started off the little community that I lived in, named the Goodwill community in Washington County. It had a all black school that had actually been created by the Goodwill Baptist Church. I think in the 1960s, 18s, yeah, in around 1865. And the teachers were dedicated to teaching, as particularly the basics. And I felt I got a good education there. Went there to the 8th grade, and then desegregation in the area occurred. And I spent I went to high school at Brenham High School. And based on the education I got in this little small rural school, I was able to graduate with honors at Brenham High School. So they focus on the basics, but I got a very sound education.
So you believe that your schools prepared you for what you would face academically here at UT?
I wouldn't go that far. I came to UT after having gone to undergraduate school at Sam Houston State in Huntsville. And I did well there, graduated with honors. But when I came to UT, it was so big and so different. I was intimidated for a while. And one of the crazy things that happened was I was in grad school. I knew it was a challenge. And the first semester, I developed allergies, and I didn't know what I had. So I thought I had become very, very ill, and that I was thinking about dropping out of school. And someone told me to stop and get some medication, and I started feeling better. But the first semester, I worked real hard. And I was afraid that I might not make it because I was from a small town, a relatively small university. And I was surprised at the end of this first semester. I think I had all A's except for one B. And that was when I gained confidence that I could do this.
What had you heard about UT Austin before you actually came here to UT?
I knew that it was considered the best university in Texas, which is why I came. I graduated with honors from an undergraduate school, came to Austin to try to get a job in state government. And I realized that while I may have gotten a good education from the standpoint of books, I had not gotten an education that equipped me to know how to navigate into a job, into a profession. And I came up here and stayed 2 days, could not even get an interview with anyone. So on my way back, I made up my mind that I was coming here. And one of my goals was, upon graduation, I would have multiple jobs. And that is what drove me. I really hadn't thought about coming to UT until I had that experience. And so I said, I made a decision, I guess I was around 21, that I was going to go to graduate school, either law school or to the LBJ School of Public Affairs. And I was coming here because I wanted to be prepared to enter the job market and have options upon graduation.
Excellent. What did you know about the Heman Sweat versus Painter case?
I was always interested in the news when I was growing up. And I was very attentive to the civil rights movement and what was happening. But my focus was not, I was aware of what the Supreme Court, the big decisions that the Supreme Court was making, and I was very much aware of the legislation that was being passed by the Johnson administration. But I didn't find out about the details of the Sweat decision until actually I came to UT.
Now, growing up, were there other civil rights cases in your area, in your part of the state that you were aware of, or that perhaps your family or others participated in?
I don't know which Supreme Court decision led to desegregation of schools, but everybody in our community was aware of that because all of the predominantly African American schools that had existed immediately shut down, except for elementary level schools remained open. And then after a couple of years, they shut down too. And we were all bused to the Brenham Independent School District. The other thing that I was aware of was that my dad and mom would always pay their poll taxes. And I remember the Voting Rights Act passing, and they talked about what it meant, and the fact that all of the shenanigans that had been put in place to keep African Americans from voting were coming to an end.
Very good. Now, you said why you decided to apply to UT. Now, when you came to UT, did you need to take an entrance exam?
Yes, I took the GRE plus I took the LSAT. My goal was to get into a joint degree program involving the law school and the LBJ School of Public Affairs. I got accepted to both, but then but that was a separate committee process in order for you to apply to get into the joint degree program. And I was denied that. So I just went ahead and went to the LBJ school.
Okay. How did your family feel about you coming to UT?
By that time, they had come to grips with the fact that I was not going to stay in Washington County. But as I was leaving I was the first in my family to actually leave home to go to school. My older sisters had gone to Blinn Junior College in Brenham and stayed at home while they did that. And so I was actually the first one to leave home, and for my mom and dad, they worried about it. They were concerned that I didn't know what I was doing, and what was going to happen, but I had made up my mind that I was leaving Washington County to go to school. And so by the time I graduated from undergraduate school, they had accepted the fact that I was going to probably move on and do something different. So it wasn't an issue. What was an issue is upon graduation from here, my first job was in D.C. And the notion of me leaving home and being 1,000 miles or more away from home, that shocked them.
Yeah.
But they got over it,
Okay.
and they were fine.
Okay. You mentioned a little bit about your first impressions of UT, the size, and perhaps being a little intimidated. Talk a little bit more about what that was like for you as a young man.
Well, I was fortunate in that I wasn't thrown into the large University of Texas. As you know, the LBJ school is across Red River by the Presidential Library. And so that made it easier in that was we were basically connected over there amongst ourselves, and so that made getting to know other students who were there, which was my primary point of interaction. However, I was intimidated. I mean, you know, I had grown up in a small town, going to small schools, and the big question was I going to be able to make it? In fact, one of the professors there was concerned about me, so she went to Rodney Ellis was a year ahead of me, so he tells the story of her coming to him, expressing concern that he needed to help me because I was from this small rural town and I was a fish out of water, and he jokes about how he thought about helping me, and then he found out that I was doing fairly well. He said he thought about I didn't need your help. Perhaps you didn't need my help. Perhaps I needed your help. But it was I mean, because of my background, it was intimidating. But I knew I could do this, and I knew it was it was going to be challenging. I recognized that the environment was not going to be friendly all the time, but the options I was looking at were going to college and getting a different kind of job, or going back and farming and picking and chopping cotton. That made the decision far easier.
Exactly. Now, speaking of professors, what do you think your professors' expectations were of you?
That I would be able to do the work, and I would put forth the effort to do the work. And my hardest professor, and I'm thankful, was a guy named Lotus Rhodes. He was the only African American professor at LBJ School at that time. And my first year, he was concerned, but he was on me. He made sure that I did well. And even if I got a good grade, he was pushing me to go to the next level. And then amazingly, in my second year, I selected him to be my advisor on the professional report I had to do. And then we became friends. And I asked him, I said, why did you push me harder, seemingly harder than anybody else? He said, because I cared about you. And I wanted you to push yourself to do as well as you could. And so even after graduate school, he and I remained in close contact until he passed away.
Now, when you were a student, did you live on campus or did you live out in the
I lived on
community?
campus my first year.
Mm-hmm.
In fact, I lived in Jester Hall. And then my second year, I got an apartment complex with another gentleman off of Red River, near Hancock Mall.
Okay. Tell me what your classroom interactions were with the students.
that one of the good things about the LBJ school, there was an expectation that there would be lots of interaction in the classroom among the students and the faculty. And so that happened. That was just the norm there. But I do remember a professor challenging me. I think we were talking about civil rights and all of that stuff. The professor's last name was Redford. And I responded in a passionate kind of way. And he said to me, young man, you need to get to the place where you are not so emotional in expressing yourself. And it pissed me off, but it helped me to develop the discipline to be able to make arguments in a detached manner if necessary, and always relying on facts. So on the one hand, I was upset about it, but it challenged me to get to that level, which I expect he wanted to see, where and I think what he was saying was that if you lead by expressing your emotions, that takes away from your effectiveness. He didn't say that, of course. He just challenged me in front of the rest of the class. It was uncomfortable, but I embraced it and adapted, and I think I learned from it.
Okay. Tell me about your circle of friends when you were here on campus.
All of my close friends went to LBJ school, except for a few folks I met on campus. And so at the time, there were 3 other African Americans in my class. A guy named, and then in the second class, there were 3 or 4 other people, including Rodney Ellis and Clotilde Haynes. And so we all connected well, but also we had students at the LBJ school from everywhere across the country. And I ended up connecting from some of the folks from Texas, but a lot of the folks from New York and East Coast and other places that had come to the school. So that was it. And I always recognized that the LBJ school, because it was over by itself, that really didn't necessarily reflect the entire school. And frankly, most of our professors, they considered themselves to be progressives. And so I can't say that I experienced real hostilities over at the LBJ school when I was there.
Okay. Now, what did you do for entertainment? I know you didn't study all the time.
For the time I was here, Earl Campbell was on the football team, both his junior year and his senior year. So I didn't miss a football game. And then I played intramural basketball. And of course, and then did movies and stuff. And then there were always lots of social things after class among the students at the LBJ school. But I worked pretty hard. I put in a lot of time studying, but yeah, that was a social life, and at the center of it was basketball and football at UT.
Awesome. Now, what was your relationship like with the broader African American community in Austin when you were here?
It was very limited, except I went to Greater Zion Baptist Church on Sundays when Reverend Bacon was the pastor, and he could, of course, as you know, he could really sing and preach. Yeah. And then I remember that he would always customize the service in such a way that those of us who were there could get back on campus, because at that time the cafeteria served steak for Sunday dinner or for Sunday lunch. But I did very little interaction at the UT campus, across the way from LBJ, and in the broader community. I was really focused on academics.
Okay. Now, when you were here, were you engaged with the NAACP or student groups or community organizations?
I was not, which was ironic, because in undergraduate school, as a freshman, I was elected president of the Black Student Union, and I was really involved there. But I came to UT for the purpose of getting a good education, so I could get a job. It was that, and I probably missed out on things because I was that focused on just that. But I probably would have left with a better education and better experience if I had gotten involved across the broader university. I didn't, and at the time I didn't even think about it. All I knew that I had been involved a lot at the undergraduate level, and even with that, I couldn't get a job, and so my thought was, I am going to focus and I'm going to do well and put myself in a position where I have opportunities down the road.
Okay. You're taking care of business, that makes sense.
Yeah.
What political events happening, not so much in Austin, but maybe in Texas in general, were you aware of, or did you follow closely while you were here?
I never liked state politics when I was growing up. So I really wasn't focused on what was going on in Texas, but I was real focused on what was going on at the national level. For example, the night that Bobby Kennedy was assassinated, he was running for the presidency, and I guess I was 14 years old, and I was interested in politics, and so I was watching the returns from I guess it was the California primary, and actually was still watching when the assassination occurred, and so I was real interested in national politics, but I really wasn't that interested because, and then the reason I was the whole civil rights movement was focused on the passing of laws nationally and Supreme Court decisions that also followed. So that was my focus politically.
Okay. Now, what spaces did you feel most comfortable in on the UT campus?
I was comfortable at the LBJ school, and that was I probably spent, and I clearly spent most of my time over there, and that the environment that was very comfortable, and most people were very friendly. Most faculty members behaved in a manner that they didn't project racism. So yeah, that was comfortable.
Okay. Now, were there places where you felt less comfortable on campus, or maybe even excluded at all?
Just the bigness of it all. During my first year, as I would be coming back to the main campus, afternoons or early evenings, I mean, I would just be looking at all of the buildings, and UT is so crowded with buildings, and which was different from Sam Houston State, where there's buildings are kind of spaced, and there is this sense of the mixture of the green and the buildings, which made those campuses more beautiful. And I noticed that was just more concrete here and more buildings, and anyway, it did feel like a college.
Okay. Looking back, how do you think coming to UT and spending time here affected you, affected your career, and the things you've done since you've left here?
I held the perspective then that if I could make it at UT, I could make it anywhere. And so coming here and doing well academically, I left this place feeling that there was nothing I couldn't do. And in fact, I spent my early years working in government, and the LBJ school really prepared me well for that. In my early jobs, I did very well, and it wasn't the fact. It wasn't, and what the LBJ school did was to provide a set of practical skills or approaches that you could apply in any work setting that I relied on. So because I did well, as I left the LBJ school, and I mean, that kind of put me on a pace where I had opportunities that I wouldn't have had if I had not been a graduate of the LBJ school.
Have you maintained a relationship with UT since leaving?
I have maintained a relationship with the folks at the LBJ school,
Okay.
but not the broader university.
Okay. And how do you think conditions may have changed for African American students now versus when you were here, or have they changed?
Based on what's going on in the broader society, I'm not sure things have changed. I think fundamentally, race relations today in this state, in this country, are probably no better than they were then. In fact, at that time, at least there was a level of shame that existed if people exhibited racism. And now people wear that with a sense of pride. I do think that there are potentially more opportunities today at the school and even in the workplace. But, the politics of the state are not good. And at least at that time at the state level, there was this notion that government had a role to play. And we have a political environment in this state today where there's almost hostility in terms of what government's role should be. And there's more of this perspective that government exists to promote business development. And if government does that, then it's assuming its role. And then, of course, all of the social stuff. So I think, on the one hand, there's more opportunity, but the politics is much more negative today, I believe, than it was at that time.
That's a pretty good assessment. What else would you like to share about your time and experiences here at UT, at the LBJ School?
I came here because I thought that if I came to UT and could make it, I would do well. And I have. Oh, perhaps by not everybody's not according to everybody else's standard, but I'm thankful and I'm satisfied about how life has gone. I've had some wonderful opportunities and jobs that were satisfying, and I give UT credit. I think it prepared me for that. It wasn't easy, but I still believe that the opportunities that I received were in part because of my having come here and the education that I got. And both in the classroom and outside of the classroom.
Excellent. Is there anything I failed to ask you that you'd like to talk about?
I guess from a distance, it seems to me today that the University of Texas and the University of Texas system has made the decision to become more engaged in the broader community. And I think that's good. I mean, there is, when you consider the University of Texas system is huge. And from the medical center complexes in the major cities to all of the branch universities, this place has tremendous power and resources and influence, and it needs to be utilizing its resources and expertise to uplift communities of all kind, particularly those communities where there have been less opportunity because of historic discrimination and racism.
I listened to an oral history you gave a few years ago, and one of the things that you said that struck me was after growing up working in the fields, you figured almost anything after that would be easy. Can you expound on that a little bit?
Well, growing up in Washington County, my dad only wanted to work for himself. And because of discrimination and the racism that existed, he was pulled out of school in the 3rd grade. He kind of grew up in a plantation setting and to work the fields, to do the agricultural work. So he knew farming. And the way he could be his own boss was to farm. And at that time, not just our family, but everybody in the community farmed. And everybody had 8 to 10 children because your children were your labor. And we would, starting in May, early May, we would start having to chop cotton. And then in July, we would have to start picking the cotton. And when you worked in that environment, it was sun up to sundown, 6 days a week. And in the heat, typically it was not unusual for the stalks of cotton to be 6 feet tall, and so there wasn't much wind flow. And it was how we made a living, but my dad loved it because he was his own boss. And what was amazing is I didn't know it at the time, we grew everything we ate. I mean, we grew chickens and turkeys and hogs and cattle, and we had a garden year round. I think when my dad would go to town, he would only buy rice and beans and those kinds of things. And one of the things that my dad and mother would do is we would be in the cotton field, and they were very strong in their faith, and so that they would together be singing songs and hymns. And my dad would look back at us and say, y'all are going to go to school to get an education, so you don't have to do this. And he repeated that refrain over and over and over again. And although we were the first in our family to go to college, 8 of 9 of us ended up getting at least one college degree. But while my dad was a farmer, and my mom, they always said, you can do better. You will do better. It's because you don't need to be doing this for the rest of your lives. And that we knew while we were picking cotton in the fields, we knew that after high school we were going to college because they had instilled that within us. And we knew that we were going to have to get jobs to pay our way because they didn't have the money to do so, and so we did. And that whole challenge, right? It was tough, but we became better people because of it. So.
Excellent. I think that's probably a good ending.
Good.
For our discussion. And John Hall, I certainly appreciate you coming in and sharing your UT experiences with us.
Well, thank you for the opportunity. I really
Thank you.
appreciate it.